Hello and welcome back to the Freelancers Tea Break. I am a couple of weeks late with this podcast purely because it's been a really busy month. I've been in some summits and some bundles and working on a couple of launches for some clients, so it's been quite hectic. But there are two topics I really want to talk about this month. This week I'm going to be talking about ADHD awareness, and not just as someone that has ADHD, but also in how to make your business perhaps more accessible for people with ADHD or autism or some other kinds of neurodivergencies as well. And next week, hopefully, I will be putting together the like a collaborative episode with lots of different people, a bit like the one that I did last month. But because it's Mental Health Month, I'm going to be sharing some tips from them on mental health. But this week, I wanted to dive into ADHD because it's ADHD Awareness Month. And I'm going to base this on a talk I recently did for the coaching crowd, and it was all about coaching as someone who's neurodivergent. But actually, I dived into a lot of things about making things more accessible, and I think that might be quite useful. So let's get into it. So first of all, I just want to give you an idea of what, because I will switch between saying ADHD and I will sometimes refer to neurodivergency as well. So first of all, something I've only learned recently, neurodivergent and neurodiverse are different terms. So neurodivergent is for people that have a range of conditions from autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, I can never say that, Down syndrome, epilepsy, and some chronic health conditions like bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder, borderline personality disorder, anxiety, and depression. Neurodiverse actually just refers to neurodivergent and neurotypical people. So I just thought that might be quite a useful thing to share because it's a mistake I was definitely making, so it might be useful. So a starting point is I'm just going to share how being ADHD has affected my life. And if you haven't listened before, I was only diagnosed in March or April this year, and I recently started on meds sort of 6 weeks ago, 6 or 7 weeks ago, I think. So the ways that my ADHD affected me, and I have inattentive, which means if you think of at school kind of the girl who daydreams a lot and struggles to concentrate sometimes, I was that girl. Whereas a kind of the stereotypical view is probably what my son is more of, which is sort of hyperactive, distracted easily, that kind of side of things. But for me, it affected me in terms of my attention to detail, my focus, my memory is really affected. I will often forget words, quite simple words, and that, unfortunately, that's not been, it's not something that medication can fix or anything. It's just something I adapt to. Self-esteem issues from being undiagnosed. I spent a long time thinking I was lazy or stupid because my ADHD did not give me the hyperactive body. It gave me the hyperactive mind, which I didn't realise until I went on meds. And I was always completely shattered. Like I would say working at like 20-30% energy, whereas now I'm probably working at 70 to 80%. So I had a lot of kind of negative thoughts about being stupid and lazy, that kind of thing. Very disorganised, and actually I kind of end up turning early for a lot of things just because I know how bad I'm going to be, and also if I know that there's an event in my diary that day, I cannot do anything but focus on that event, so I usually get there early for that reason. A really key one is that motivation isn't a given. And a big problem that people with ADHD have is that our dopamine, there's a theory basically at the moment, I think, based on research, that our brains are too efficient in processing dopamine. So dopamine is what keeps you motivated, and it contributes to good mood and things like that. And it's why quite often people with ADHD will pick up a hobby, get really excited, hyper focus on it, and then get bored. It's because our brains have processed the dopamine too quickly. So one big thing I've been learning is all about how to basically trick my brain into being motivated about certain things. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I definitely prefer deep talk to small talk. That could also be an introvert thing though. Yeah, not great with small talk. I can be impatient or get bored easier. I don't necessarily show that, but I can feel it. And that's not in conversations and things like that. That's usually in like queuing and stuff like that. And I'm impulsive, and as you might have gathered from this podcast, I'm an oversharer. I've got no filter. I'm pretty much an open book. I just don't have the ability to, like, I have some filter, but like, I don't really have the ability to manipulate conversations and keep things to myself. It just takes up too much energy, basically. But I want to make it very clear that ADHD, autism, everything like that is completely different for each person, and there's not like a checklist of you have to tick off all of these things. There is actually a checklist, but you don't have to tick off every single one of those things to be ADHD or autistic. And for ADHD, it's quite useful to know that there are 3 kinds. There's inattentive, which is me, which is kind of distracted, struggles to focus, attention to detail. Hyperactive, which is kind of the typical what people see in boys, in particular, which is why so many girls and women get overlooked. And combined, which is both. And also a word on that, a lot of women are getting diagnosed at the moment. And I think it's because they are realising through having children and all of their carefully put together processes and survival techniques go out the window, or they have ADHD children themselves and realise. But also it comes to things like TikTok, which I know everyone's like, you shouldn't diagnose through TikTok. TikTok is perfectly designed for people with ADHD. It is like constant shots of dopamine. So that's why there are so many of us discovering it through TikTok, because TikTok is ADHD paradise, basically. But yeah, there's a whole mix of symptoms, and people can have comorbidities. So it's really common for people with ADHD to have autism or dyslexia, or anxiety. I've definitely had anxiety in the past. I'm on anxiety meds. There's loads of different ways that they can all overlap. It's not all bad news. ADHDers in particular can be creative, out-of-the-box thinkers, empathy by the bucket load, because we do struggle on a day-to-day basis so much, sometimes without realising because it's our norm. But I described it recently as, it's like having a brain full of really angry drunk bees, and they're all bumping against each other, and you don't necessarily feel angry, but you might feel anxious and stressed because there's so many things going on in your head. And going on meds, for me, and it doesn't work for everyone, but for me, it made that brain full of bees feel more like a unit working together rather than fighting against each other. But it does, I think, make a lot of people more empathetic to others. Hyperfocus, when it's on the right thing, can be brilliant. If I hyperfocus on a project, I'm all in, I'm really passionate about it, I'm really excited, and it doesn't necessarily always wear off. Like, I'm still really passionate about freelancing, and it's been like 13, 14 years now. So that hyperfocus can be brilliant. ADHD is, because they can be impulsive, are more open to trying new things. They're also used to reframing things, I think, sometimes, and being more aware of their mindset. And again, with the impulsivity, it means that they can be more flexible. And also, ADHDs are often multi-potentialites, which is people who have lots of different talents, lots of different skills. So, I just wanted to share a couple of life hacks that might be useful for this. So, on the motivation side of things, I mentioned before about how I have to trick my brain sometimes into doing boring tasks. So I have a piece of paper on my board here next to me, and it says, how can I make this task more fun, novel, competitive, or urgent? And I think I've touched on this in a previous podcast, but this is how I trick. So if I have to do my accounts, I don't like doing my accounts. It's boring. So for me, for other people, it's their ideal of hyper-focus heaven. But I need to look at how to make it either fun, novel, or competitive, or urgent. So quite often urgent is the last idea, where I do it at the last minute, but I don't tend to do that now. My accountant very kindly keeps me on track to usually do it by the end of the summer. But if I need to sit down and just do my book work for the end of the month, I might want to make it fun by having some great music on, or taking myself off to a coffee shop, just reframe it into something that's more fun. Novel, so that could be new pens, new software, just something new that makes it exciting. Same with housework. If I'm in a bit of a rut with my housework at the moment. I've had like 6 weeks of it going really well, and now I'm getting a bit bored again. So I know it's not ideal, it's not eco-friendly, but I would probably end up getting... Actually, I don't even need to get a new cleaning product. I can look up online for a new tip or something that I can try out. That would refresh it enough. So the novel element is competitive. So I might say, I'm going to set an hour to do this. I might do a co-working session with somebody else so that I keep on track. And urgent. So fun, novel, competitive, urgent. I have to trick my brain into it. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. It's also worth writing a dopamine menu. If you have a look on Instagram, there's loads of suggestions for dopamine menus. They're basically a list of things that give you dopamine. And top of mind is always things like music, like really mood boosting music, a bit of a dance around the kitchen, or I talk a bit about eat that frog, but actually eat those tadpoles are just as important. So ticking off some things to get the momentum going. So I might want to do like some mini tasks if I'm doing my accounts that I know will only take a couple of minutes just to get the momentum going. And then a word on organisation, because this is a big problem for a lot of people with ADHD. Although there are plenty of ADHDs out there who are amazing at organisation, that's not me. So outsource where possible. So I have a VA, Jo, who is amazing, and she just keeps on top of everything for me, basically. So my email goes out every single week because of Jo. I write all the content, and she does the finishing bits that I struggle with. So she takes the content, puts it in ConvertKit, schedules it. So it's always the finishing stuff that I struggle with. Or she'll double check something for me, or we have an accountability session every month where we plan out the content that I'm going to be sharing on the podcast and the newsletter every month. So just having that person that's a finisher or can create a space to talk about things is really, really important. And it's why coaching is so important for freelancers particularly who have ADHD. Sorry, I had to pause there for a cough. Particularly if they have ADHD, to get that accountability, that support, that space to talk things through, and that help, basically. And also organise in a way that works for you. Stop trying to organise yourself in a neurotypical way. If it doesn't work for your brain, it's not going to work for you. And I have found some brilliant tips on TikTok. There's also a lady called Clutterbug who's got a brilliant way of organising if it's like the physical things, but also use tools that work for you online. Like if some people love Asana and Trello. I personally love Notion because it's very visual and it's much easier for me to use and move around and edit. So just because a tool works for everybody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So feel free to try different tools. I would also highly recommend cognitive therapy. It's a way of catching, checking and changing negative thought patterns. And actually that's been a really big thing for me to realise I'm not lazy or stupid, and I can catch that thought and go. And this is more since my diagnosis I've been able to do it. It's almost like being given my diagnosis allowed me permission to say, actually, I'm not lazy, I'm not stupid. So if the kitchen, I'm going to give a random example. Our kitchen's a mess at the moment. Just the last couple of days, I've been really busy with work. I just haven't been able to put everything away. And pre-diagnosis, my thought process would be, oh, you're so stupid and lazy, everybody else can do that. And now I catch that thought and I check it and I think, actually, I'm not stupid or lazy. I haven't had time or energy to do that tidying up. It will get done. And I have been chipping away at it each day. So then I can change it and go, look, you've been really busy and you only have so much energy. It will get done. Don't worry. But you just have to reframe some of these things sometimes and check that they're accurate, which is really hard when you have ADHD. So, right, the part which might be useful for people who don't have ADHD or autism, but they want to make their business more accessible. And actually, these are tips that are going to make everybody, all of your business more accessible to everybody, regardless of whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. So, first thing is, how easy are your processes? So is it easy for people to sign up with you? The less steps, the better. And this was a really interesting conversation we've had a couple of times in my membership this month actually, about how much information you're sharing to onboard. And I'm actually going to be assessing my own ones, because I know when I onboard people on the Business Lounge, I have a tendency to overload people with information. And I'm going to go back now and just make it one link on that page where they can find the more information, but it's one step at a time. So I think that would be useful for everybody, really. It makes it much, much easier than a whole email, which is what I currently send, with loads of different links, because I tend to over cater and try and give too much information, and that's overwhelming. It also helps to have those steps are small, because it gives that kind of dopamine momentum roll, which is really great. And also be very clear on the processes and deadlines. This is particularly useful for those with autism as well. Try to avoid any last minute changes. Again, this is something I'm working on. I'm now planning out all of the kind of sessions we have in the membership and putting them in the group a lot earlier to allow for everybody to access them, and for it to be better for forward planners and those with autism who really appreciate that structure. And also, how clear and inclusive is your language? So for those with autism, clear and concise language can be really helpful. And for those with ADHD, skip the boring business lingo if you can. I'd zone out completely. It's not great for that sort of thing. But also, this is a case for everything, really. I mean, is your text easy to read? Is there a crazy background that makes people struggle to read the text? Is your imagery inclusive? And this can cover so many different things. And even a previous episode we've had talking about being childless not through choice. There's a lot of talk about parenting and being a mum and as a woman and things like that. And there's lots of language that you can tweak around that, or around disabilities, and having imagery on your website that involves people with disabilities. Again, this is something I'm working on as well and learning a lot more about. So this is something you could very easily do. Look at your website as an outsider point of view and think, how inclusive is this? You're obviously going to have your ideal client that you're going to be talking to, but is your ideal client so niche? Are you just talking for example, to white women with children, for example, who are neurotypical? And could you sort of grow that niche and change that niche to have a wider variety of people involved? One big thing you can ask is, do they have any requirements? So when you're onboarding somebody, for example, ask if they have any accessibility needs. Do they need extra meeting reminders? Coaching notes after? Do they prefer their coaching notes as audio or video, or is a short email fine? If you're meeting in person, do they need somewhere with less distractions? Do they need movement breaks? Things like that. So these are simple things, and you probably find most people are not going to need any of those, but offering them just makes you so much more accessible and inclusive for everybody. And the other option is there's a new kind of bionic reading font, which is really good for people with ADHD, but it's supposed to be quite good for people with dyslexia, I think, as well. And I think they're rolling out like a plugin that you can add. But have a look at some of the plugins for your websites for accessibility and things like that. Make it much easier. So there are so many more things you can do, and I'm going to pop some resources in the blurb, in the bio information, blah blah blah. I can't remember what it's called for this moment. In the description, I'll pop some more information. This is all from my own experience, so I would love to know if I'm missing any more, or if there's something more that I can add to this. It'd be really welcome. But yeah, I would basically just encourage you to have a look at your copy, have a look at your website. Is it as inclusive as it can be? And are there some small steps you can take to do that? If you have any questions about ADHD, I am, as I mentioned earlier, an open book. Do feel free to just message me. I'm not an expert. This would only be on my own experiences. There are plenty of people who take different approaches to it, and everyone's got different symptoms and things like that. But yes, feel free to message me on Instagram. I'm always happy to answer any questions. I'm Emma Cossey on there. And come join us in the Facebook group, the Freelance Lifestylers. Sorry, because this is a longer one, I'm jumping over my words now. Yeah, in the Freelance Lifestylers group, it's full of lovely people. There's a really good mix of neurotypical, neurodivergent. I will say, freelancing does tend to attract more neurodivergents because we don't fit in corporate worlds quite often. So if you are feeling like that, and one final word: if you are thinking you might have it, I would recommend having a look at Psychiatry UK. They are an NHS right to choose partner, which means you can go through them, but it's still free. And I think at the moment their waiting list is about 6 months. If you go direct through the NHS, it's a lot longer. So if you go on their website, they've got a letter you can print off, present that. And if you go to the doctor, go along with a list of ways you think it's affecting you at the moment, a list of ways you think it affected you as a childhood, and some kind of examples, because that's going to be the key thing. They want to know if it affected you in childhood. And also just be aware that you might not even know some of the ways that it is affecting you. And I didn't until I was finally put on meds, and I didn't realise how busy my brain was until I went on the meds, and it's just it's just incredible. But it's not perfect. There's definitely trial and error. I'm having to learn how to relax now, because I used to rely on a daily nap, and that turns out that was my stress reliever, to have a nap, and now I don't need to have a nap, so I'm having to retrain my brain, I think. So there's a lot of kind of adjustments, I would say. But yes, don't be surprised if you suddenly realise how much your life has been affected if you have these symptoms. And there might be a mourning period. That's quite common as well. Right, I'm blabbering now, but I just wanted to share some of that in case you feel like you might have ADHD, but also it might be useful if you want to make your business more inclusive. Have a good week, everyone, and I will be back next week with that collaborative episode on mental health.